The Midnight Menagerie was a whisper on the wind. A legend passed from mouth to mouth among the brave or foolish. It was said to be a carnival that appeared only after midnight, in forgotten fields or abandoned lots, its glowing lights and haunting music beckoning like sirens in the dark. There were no advertisements, no flyers, no schedule. And yet, it always found an audience, those curious enough or desperate enough to seek its wonders. By dawn, it was gone, leaving nothing but whispers of fear and awe in its wake. Lila had always dismissed the stories as fanciful urban legends, tales spun by bored locals looking for a thrill. But when she and her friends, Ethan and Kara, spotted a strange glow on the horizon during a late-night drive, her skepticism began to waver. The glow pulsed like a heartbeat, the faint strains of carnival music drifting on the breeze. Against their better judgment, they decided to investigate. The source of the light turned out to be a sprawling carnival, its colorful tents and twinkling lights illuminating the otherwise barren field. A grand archway loomed before them, adorned with flickering bulbs that spelled out Midnight Menagerie in looping, elegant script. The sign seemed to shimmer as if alive, the letters twisting and untwisting in the corner of Lila's eye. As they stepped inside, they were greeted by a man in a crimson coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his face partially obscured by shadows. His eyes glinted like polished stones as he swept into a theatrical bow. "Welcome, esteemed guests," he said, his voice a velvet purr. "Tonight, you are in for wonders beyond your wildest dreams, but remember, every wonder comes at a price." The attractions were nothing short of extraordinary. Acrobats twisted in impossible formations high above the ground, defying gravity and reason. A carousel featured intricately carved animals that seemed to breathe, their painted eyes tracking the riders. One booth offered Time Reclaimed, promising visitors the chance to relive their fondest memories, while another displayed Creatures of the Beyond, cages filled with beasts so otherworldly they seemed plucked from nightmares. At first, Lila and her friends were captivated, wandering from one marvel to the next. But the wonder soon gave way to unease. At the Hall of Reflections, Lila stood before a mirror that didn't show her reflection, but instead replayed a memory she had buried deep. The day she had caused a childhood accident that left her younger brother scarred. The scene was so vivid, so real, it was as though she were reliving it. Then her reflection turned to look at her, its lips curling into a smirk as it whispered, "You can't hide from me forever." Ethan and Kara fared no better. Ethan entered a maze of mirrors, only to find that the walls reflected not his image but twisted, distorted versions of himself, each whispering his deepest insecurities. Kara visited the Tent of Wonders, where a fortune teller revealed secrets about her life that no one else could possibly know, leaving her shaken and pale. When they regrouped, the carnival no longer felt like a place of wonder. The staff, once charming, now lingered in the shadows, their smiles too wide, their movements unnervingly fluid. The attractions seemed alive, almost predatory, as though waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ethan panicked and bolted toward the exit, but instead of freedom, he stumbled into the center ring of the big top. Lila and Kara followed his screams, only to find him standing on stage, dressed in a ringleader's garb, his face pale and his eyes vacant. He moved like a puppet on strings, forced to perform for an audience of shadowy figures that clapped soundlessly. "You can't leave," the crimson-coated man said, appearing beside them with a flourish. His smile was cold, his teeth sharp. "Not without paying the price." "What is this place?" Lila demanded, backing away. "This is the Midnight Menagerie," he replied, spreading his arms. "A feast of fears, a banquet of desires. You bring the entertainment. We simply provide the stage." Desperate to escape, Lila grabbed Kara, and they ran, dodging through attractions that seemed to come alive to stop them. The carousel animals lunged from their posts, snapping at their heels, while the laughter of unseen children echoed around them. They finally reached the archway, only to find the field beyond it, shrouded in impenetrable darkness. Go, Lila urged Kara, but her friend hesitated, her gaze fixed on a booth labeled, Escape to Your Dream Life. Don't listen, Lila cried, but it was too late. Kara stepped inside, her body dissolving into mist, as the crimson-coated man tipped his hat in farewell. Lila turned back, her heart pounding, but the carnival was gone. She stood alone in the dark field, the faint hum of carnival music still echoing in her ears. She had escaped, but she knew the menagerie had marked her. Its pull was insidious, and she feared it would find her again. Somewhere the midnight menagerie would rise once more, its lights beckoning the curious and the unwary. And Lila, haunted by its horrors, could only pray that no one else would fall victim to its eternal hunger. The carnival arrived without warning, an explosion of light and sound against the dark countryside. Its arrival stirred the small town into a frenzy of excitement. Bright banners and the scent of fried dough lured families, couples, and thrill-seekers into its embrace. But the real draw that night was the Laughing Maze, a decrepit funhouse at the farthest edge of the carnival grounds. Emily, Jake, Mia, and Ben stood outside the towering structure, its faded neon sign flickering ominously. The word laughing buzzed intermittently, its letters casting jagged shadows over the peeling paint of the entrance. I've heard about this place, Ben said, shoving his hands into his pockets. They say no one's made it through to the end. Emily scoffed, nudging him playfully. You're such a wimp. It's just mirrors. Jake grinned. Yeah, let's prove it's not that scary. They pushed open the creaking door, stepping into a dimly lit hallway that reeked of old wood and mildew. The faint sound of laughter echoed in the distance, playful and inviting. They paid the attendant, a stooped man whose sunken eyes followed them silently, and entered the maze. The mirrors greeted them with distorted reflections, their faces stretched, twisted, and bent into grotesque shapes. The group laughed nervously, poking fun at their warped appearances. Look at my head, Mia exclaimed, giggling as her reflection ballooned comically. But as they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the laughter took on a sharper, more menacing tone. The funhouse lights flickered, casting brief, eerie shadows across the walls. Did the mirrors just move? Jake asked, stopping suddenly. What are you talking about? Emily said, rolling her eyes. Jake pointed to a mirror at the far end of the corridor. His reflection stood still, staring back at him, even as he turned his head to speak. The grin on its face was wide, unnatural, and unmoving. Okay, that's creepy, Mia muttered, stepping closer to Jake. The group continued hesitantly, the laughter growing louder, no longer playful. It surrounded them, echoing endlessly, as if the maze itself were alive. They tried to retrace their steps, but every turn led them deeper into the labyrinth. None of this makes sense, Ben said, his voice cracking. We should have found the exit by now. Panic set in when they realized they weren't alone. Shadows flickered in the periphery of their vision, darting between mirrors. Emily spun around, certain she'd seen movement, but all she found was her own reflection, except it wasn't quite hers. The eyes were wrong. They seemed to shimmer with malice. The first scream came from Mia. Her reflection leaned out of its mirror, its hands clawing at the glass. She stumbled back, but the reflection didn't retreat. Instead, it smiled and whispered, "Stay with us." The mirrors around them began to ripple, the glass turning liquid. Hands emerged, pale and clawed, reaching for them. Jake grabbed a loose piece of metal from the floor and swung it at the nearest mirror, but the glass absorbed the blow, rippling as if made of water. "We have to get out of here," Emily yelled, grabbing Mia's arm. But as they turned to flee, the corridor behind them vanished, replaced by an unending stretch of mirrors. Ben tripped and fell, and his reflection seized the opportunity. It shot out of the glass, dragging him back in with impossible strength. His screams echoed as his reflection stepped out in his place, its grin stretching unnaturally wide. Jake grabbed Emily and Mia, pulling them forward. "Don't stop running." They ran blindly, their breath hitching as the laughter grew deafening. The reflections in the mirrors no longer mimicked their movements. They watched with hungry eyes, reaching and clawing at the edges of the glass, waiting for their moment. Mia was the next to fall. Her reflection was waiting for her, its eyes gleaming with malice. It yanked her into the mirror with a wet, slurping sound, leaving her cries to fade into silence. Emily and Jake stumbled into a large chamber, surrounded by towering mirrors that pulsed like beating hearts. Their reflections stared back at them, grinning. "Emily," Jake whispered, his voice shaking. "This is it. We're not getting out." "No," she said, shaking her head frantically. "There has to be a way. There has to—" The mirrors erupted, their reflections stepping out, surrounding them. Emily screamed as hands clawed at her, dragging her toward the glass. Jake fought, but his strength was no match for the inhuman figures. The next morning, the carnival packed up and vanished. The laughing maze stood empty, its mirrors pristine, reflecting the faces of its newest additions, forever frozen in terror. The carnival appeared as if by magic, setting up overnight in the vacant lot on the outskirts of town. Its vibrant banners and swirling lights were impossible to ignore, a beacon of color and sound in the otherwise lifeless stretch of countryside. The scent of buttery popcorn and fried sweets wafted on the breeze, mingling with the faint strains of carousel music. Nobody remembered hearing about it in advance. No advertisements, no flyers. Yet by morning, word had spread like wildfire. The entire town buzzed with excitement, desperate for a distraction from their humdrum lives. At the carnival gates, a lone figure stood beneath an arch of blinking lights. The ticket taker. He was an odd sight, even in a place full of oddities. Tall and rail-thin, he wore a crimson coat that hung from his angular frame like a shroud. His pale face seemed to glow under the flickering lights, his smile too wide, as though painted on. His eyes, dark and unblinking, followed each guest as they approached, scanning them with unnerving precision. When Emma arrived with her friends, she was laughing, her breath clouding the cool evening air. The three of them, Emma, Ryan, and Jess, had come on a whim, lured by the promise of cheap thrills and sugary treats. As they approached the gate, the ticket taker's head tilted slightly, his smile sharpening. "Tickets, please," he said in a voice so smooth, it felt like velvet brushing against Emma's skin. One by one, they handed over their tickets. When it was Emma's turn, the ticket taker paused. His gloved fingers lingered on her ticket, and for a moment, his gaze bore into hers. "Ah," he murmured, slipping a golden ticket from his pocket and presenting it to her with a flourish. "You've been chosen." Emma blinked. "Chosen for what?" "A special attraction," he said, his smile widening. "The Hall of Secrets, a rare honor reserved for those with potential." Her friends laughed, nudging her. "Go on, Emma. Don't chicken out." Uneasy but unable to resist the lure of curiosity, Emma accepted the golden ticket. The ticket taker's grin grew impossibly wide, and he gestured toward a narrow path leading deeper into the carnival. The Hall of Secrets was tucked away at the edge of the grounds, far from the bustling crowds and cheerful noise. The entrance was shrouded in black velvet curtains, which swayed gently despite the still air. Above the doorway, a sign glowed faintly. "Face the truth within." Emma hesitated. The golden ticket felt heavier in her pocket, as if urging her forward. Steeling herself, she pushed through the curtains and stepped inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, the air heavy with an oppressive silence. A single ornate mirror stood in the center, its frame etched with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when she looked too closely. "Welcome," the ticket taker's voice echoed, though he was nowhere to be seen. Emma's reflection shimmered in the glass, and for a moment it seemed normal. Then it changed. The image warped, her face twisting into something grotesque. Her eyes burned red, her mouth stretched into a jagged grin, and blood streaked down her cheeks like tears. The reflection stared back at her, mocking her. What is this?" Emma stammered, backing away. The mirror began to show scenes from her life, each one sharper than the last. A lie she'd told to a friend, a betrayal she'd justified to herself, a moment of cruelty she thought no one had seen. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not me. That's not who I am." The ticket taker's voice came again, this time from behind her. "The mirror doesn't lie. It shows what you've buried, what you refuse to face. To leave, you must confess your sins, or stay, as part of the carnival forever." Emma spun around, but there was no one there. The walls seemed to close in, and the room filled with whispers. Shadows emerged from the corners, coalescing into figures with hollow eyes and twisted faces. One of them reached for her, its bony fingers brushing her arm. She screamed and stumbled backward, her hands pressing against the cold surface of the mirror. The glass rippled like water, pulling her in. She struggled, but the shadows were too strong. As her body sank into the mirror, her reflection smirked and stepped out, taking her place. The next night, the carnival gates opened again and the ticket taker resumed his post. He greeted the new arrivals with his wide, unsettling grin, his dark eyes glinting with secrets. Deep within the Hall of Secrets, the real Emma screamed silently, her face now etched into the frame of the mirror, forever trapped in its cursed reflection.